Good evening. I would like to call to order the Legal Affairs Committee meeting for tonight, January 23rd. We have one item on the agenda, that item being a motion from Councilor Peach to discuss the implementation of citywide sidewalk snow and ice removal ordinance with fines. I'll now turn it over to Councilor Peach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, under suspension of the rules, would move to receive 8C and refer to this discussion.
You heard the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? It's a vote. Just for clarification, in this meeting, there is Councilor Peach, Councilor Turco, Councilor Higgins, and sitting in for Councilor Melville. Would you do the honors, Councilor Gamache? Thank you. Also in attendance are Councilor Gould, Councilor McGinn, and Councilor Manning Martin. Councilor Peach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I made this motion. I think it may have been one of the first motions I made as a city councilor. We've been last winter, I think we were lucky with the lack of snow we got, so it kind of got pushed to the wayside, but the last two storms we had have reminded us that we live in New England. Essentially, what I am looking to do would be to amend our existing snow removal ordinance, which focuses solely on specific areas throughout the city, and impose that ordinance citywide with adding fines. Our existing ordinance, which is location specific, doesn't have an attached fine defined in the ordinance. I know we have fines that can be issued regardless of if it's listed specifically in the ordinance, but looking at our neighboring communities, most, if not all, have removal ordinances and impose fines. Salem, I believe, is the most recent community who did this, and they did it, I believe, in 2020 or 2021. In 8C, which was a communication from myself to the council, is just our existing language, and then the language that Salem utilizes in their list of ordinances. So, yeah, you know, if the committee would like to move forward with this, I would propose removing the majority of our existing language. And we can get more specific when the time comes. And I think the language, looking through different communities and the language that they have, I think the language in Salem is pretty concise compared to other communities. It's easy to understand. It defines, you know, when snow and ice need to be removed from the sidewalk. It implements the fines, and it also gives authority to different city officials to enforce this. So it wouldn't just be our code enforcement officers. So I would be looking to have, because I know it's an undertaking, as many people within the city that makes sense based on the job they do, have the authority to enforce this ordinance if it would pass. I'm not looking for the city to make money here. I'm looking for some sort of actionable, enforceable ordinance when I get calls from parents or when I myself walk my kids to school and we have lovely shoveled sidewalks and then randomly nothing, and we have to go into the street, or my kids have been wearing their winter boots to school since the first time it snowed. So with little kids, you can imagine getting winter boots on and then hoping that they can take them off themselves and change into their sneakers on their own in their classroom. We're doing okay, I think, but it's just an added thing that's not actually necessary. I find in Ward 3, it's not really an issue with the elderly being unable to remove snow. We have a lot of multifamily housing that's not owner occupied. So these landlords are likely just contracting snow removal out, and those contracts are for clearing the driveway because they're not required to clear the sidewalk. But if we can implement this citywide, there's now an incentive to make sure the sidewalk's cleared, not just because it's the right thing to do, especially in a community like Ward 3 where many kids are walking to school. Once there's snow, the streets are already narrowed. We have kids walking in the street while cars are trying to pass by, and it's no longer even wide enough for 2 cars to pass by because the parking ban gets lifted, the snow is still there. And if you've ever been to rolling drop-off at the Carroll School, you understand. And I don't think this is specific to Ward 3, and I don't think it's specific to the Carroll School. It's just an issue that I noticed before I was on the council. It's something that has been talked about. Many residents have reached out to me, not just in Ward 3, but across the city, and it's mainly a concern for students being able to get to school safely. I think this kind of solves it. Every community around us has very similar language. And I don't think we're like Boston, like wait until the clock strikes midnight and we write you a ticket, but allow, when the calls come in, that there is something we can say. Like, if you don't remove it, you are going to get a fine. And then that just becomes the culture and the norm across the city that we remove snow from the sidewalk. So I'm hoping that this can move forward, but open to discussion from other counselors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Peach. Before us, we also have Community Development, DPW, Police, as well as our City Solicitor for any questions. I'll now open it up to the rest of the councilors. Councilor Gamache.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for allowing me to be on the committee. I know we got the DPW director and the assistant here. There's, from what I understand, there's 36 miles of sidewalk that they currently plow with the bombardiers, and it does cover quite a vast range. They do try to get around the schools, but I fully understand the issue of, especially downtown, where you got the smaller streets that don't get plowed. The main accesses get plowed, Lynn Street, all those get plowed for that. It's kind of a catch-22 for someone like myself, and I'm not going to speak for the councilor of Ward 6, but in West Peabody, we don't necessarily have that. We don't have a lot of walkers going to the school. Downtown, every downtown school, from the center school on, has walkers. And I think this is a great ordinance that should mandate that these people shovel. I just have some reservations about making it citywide, especially up in the western part of the city where there's absolutely no school walkers. And I can attest to that because I drop my grandkids off and the line is a mile long and I don't see anybody walking to school. I defer to Councilor Higgins as far as the Burke School and the West School, but most of it's a drop-off. And I totally understand because you got kids that are living on Evans and Newcastle if they walk to school. So I can agree on that principle, but it's citywide is a tough thing for me to swallow, and I do agree that there's something that's needed to be done. So I'd like to just listen to what the other councils have to say concerning if there's any concern for the western part of the city where there's absolutely no walkers.
Thank you, Councilor Gamache. Any other councilors that wish to speak at this time? Councilor Higgins.
Yes, I also have reservations being a Ward 6 resident and getting, I've talked to numerous residents about different issues, especially recent water line breaks. And whenever this topic comes up, there's nobody in my ward that's screaming for this. In fact, they may be screaming the opposite. But we do have a few areas.
I'm sorry, Councilor Higgins, could you just speak up just a little bit?
Sorry.
I had a hard time
We do have some areas like near the schools that are very important, and Councilor Gamache mentioned that the city is clearing about 36 miles of sidewalks, and I think I'd like to know the priority. I think we could prioritize what sidewalks are going to get cleared by the city. I see Lowell Street throughout Ward 6 is cleared by the city. It's not done by residents, and then it's also going to be difficult to give out the fines. I don't know who's going to be responsible for fining and going out and inspecting areas and what kind of staffing requirements that's going to involve for folks to, you know, and the determinations as to, you know, one side of Lowell Street has a sidewalk, the other side does not. So when the snow is on the ground, it's hard to see if they have a sidewalk or not. You know, people are going to start claiming, you know, why are those houses not shoveling their sidewalk? And the answer is going to be they don't have one. So our inspectors are going to have to, you know exactly where the sidewalks are before they give out fines. I'd like to know how we're doing with the current ordinance. We have targeted specific areas in the downtown of the business development section. How many fines have we issued? I don't think we know the answer to that. I'd like to see if how we're doing with enforcing it. And as far as, you know, looking at neighboring communities that have a citywide ordinance, I also looked at those. And I work in Beverly. I've been there for 12 years. They have a citywide ordinance. And I see a number of sidewalks daily, especially in this recent snowstorm, that are not shoveled. I don't see people adhering to clearing out their sidewalks, and I don't believe they're being fined either. So this ordinance stands to go citywide, I'm really not in support of it this way, but I am in support of doing something to address some of the areas in the downtown that aren't getting cleared out. Perhaps we could expand the number of streets. And I'd also like to know if the city is planning, in the DPS department, since they are clearing some sidewalks and they do 36 miles, are they planning to add more equipment or staff to address other sidewalks, rather than try to do it this way through an ordinance where we're trying to fine residents for not doing it? I'd like to hear from other councilors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Higgins. Councilor Turkle and then Councilor McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect to my colleagues in the western side of the city, I don't think that's going to fly very well amongst our residents. I think that I could read the Facebook posts tomorrow with the separation of South Peabody shoveling and West Peabody not shoveling. So maybe we need to do a little work on the ordinance. As far as enforcement, if you don't mind, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, can I ask Captain Richards to come up to the podium for a minute? Captain.
Captain Richards.
Captain, thank you. I'm sorry, maybe if you want to introduce yourself.
Captain Richards, Peabody Police Department.
Thank you, Captain Richards.
Captain, I was
Councilor
just,
Turkle.
as far as, obviously you see that we probably need to do some work on this ordinance, right up front, but from your opinion with the enforcement suggestions here with all building inspectors, the director and general foreman of the Department of Public Services, in addition to police officers, do you see any issues with the enforcement, or have you talked to other police departments that enforce these type of things and issues while doing so?
I haven't yet, and I'd like to, because the ordinances can be well-written, but if you don't have the personnel and the ability to exercise the enforcement piece of it, it doesn't work. So there are complications to this whole thing on the enforcement of it, and if you have all those different entities enforcing it, then you get a lot of people doing that. But you have to answer questions about the fines, where the money goes. You know you're going to have a ton of appeals from people that are getting tickets. Who handles the appeals? So all that has to be considered when you're writing an ordinance like this. And so you want to make sure all those moving parts have been, all those questions have been answered before we do an ordinance like this. Certainly clearing the sidewalks is a priority. We need to figure out how to do that. I read one of these ordinances where they have a lot of exemptions for elderly people and for handicapped folks. How is the enforcement people supposed to know who's exempted from that? And when they're going out and doing their thing, is there going to be a list for that? So there are complications to it. I don't think it's something that can't be done, but I would certainly like to follow up with some of these police departments that have these ordinances and actually ask them, if you do enforce it, how do you enforce it, and how is it working for you, and what are you doing? So there's some research that I would like to do further on this with these departments that have these ordinances.
Thank you. In addition to that, obviously, there's going to be confrontation with some of these. So when you issue a fine like these, for snow removal, does it have to be given in hand to the resident, or can it be mailed to the resident?
It can be mailed, but typically you like to put them in hand, because if you mail them, they're going to, a lot of people say, I never got it, whatever. So it's better to give it in hand, but they can be mailed.
Okay, and as far as those that are directed by ordinance that are able to write tickets, does the police department have to approve any of those designees, or is that just by ordinance?
I think that's by ordinance.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, I can defer for a moment if anybody has a question for Captain Richards. Well, he's here. If not, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the Facilities Director to come up. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry, not facilities, excuse me, public
Actually,
public
Captain
services.
Richards, hold on one second. Does anybody else have any other questions for Captain Richards? Thank you. Thank you, Captain Richards. I'm sorry, Council Turco.
Thank you. My apologies. In my world, we call it facilities. So, yes, the Public Services Director, if he could come up.
Mr. Politz, if you could just state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Good evening. William Politz, the Director of the Department of Public Services. We're located at 50 Farm Ave.
Thank you. Councilor Turco.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Politz. Well, do you, Dave mentioned 36 miles of sidewalk citywide. Is that, give or take, do you have an accurate number for the amount of sidewalk that's in the city?
Yeah, that's the amount of sidewalks we plow. That's the number we gave to Dave.
It is 36. Okay, so you currently,
Roughly, yes.
so you currently do that, but with the ordinance added, would you then do no sidewalks and then just leave that up to the residents if it was passed as a citywide ordinance, or would you still do the mains, or what would your intention be if we passed this ordinance for your department? And I know you have a staffing issue, most definitely. You know, we've talked about that in the past. But would you still continue to do some of the sidewalks? Do you foresee that, or have you even put any thought into that?
Well, that's a great question. I think that would be something we might want to take a look at to see if the ordinance does pass, how that's actually being implemented. As Captain Richards says, you know, if there's residents out there that aren't actually implementing the shoveling of the sidewalk, we may still be out there. You know, we may still be required to get out there and clear these sidewalks if it's not being done. In an ideal world, I guess we wouldn't be doing it because it'd be done by the residents or property owners.
Okay, and thank you. And as of today, there's no. Have you submitted at all for additional help for your department for laborers or equipment operators, or is it the status quo? I mean, I'm not. It may be too early in the budget season, but have you talked to the mayor about additional staffing or anything to that effect as of yet?
No, we have not discussed FY26 staffing issues. So we are just running through the staffing that we have currently and the equipment that we have.
Thank you. And you know, and I'll just say, you know, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. You and I spoke last week. It's a problem system-wide with all DPWs, all municipalities and state agencies, for that matter, where it's not mandatory. You can't make it mandatory that people show up for overtime. So if they want to come in, they come in. Sidewalks are probably one of the more difficult and monotonous things to do, so you don't get a big turnout for those events. And regardless of whether, and this is just my opinion, and you can, you know, add to that if you'd like, that regardless if we added personnel, which I do agree you need, it still doesn't force the fact that they would have to come in on their shift, but after their shift is over, they don't have to stay. And if I recall correctly, your contract reads the same as mine, something to best effort to show up for snow removal or snow events. Am I correct?
Yes, I believe I don't know the specific language of the contract, but yes, the contract pretty much reads best efforts that need to be provided. So that certainly is not mandatory as much as we would think that is mandatory. And then, yes, the problem, as you had sort of alluded to on the sidewalks, it's asking the staff to stay on after however long the event is. So if it's a 10-hour plowing event, then they'd be staying on to continue sidewalks, or if it's a, larger event, 18 hours in, then that's when they'd be, we'd be looking to have them stay on to continue sidewalks at that point. But primarily, we take the responsibility of clearing the roads, and then we have, in addition to that, we have school parking lots, municipal parking lots, and police, fire stations, and then, we're also doing sidewalks at that point as well.
Okay, last question. Do you support an ordinance like this? Does this work for DPS? Have you had time to actually kind of digest this and see if this is an ordinance? I believe it would be helpful to you, but just in your opinion, you think it would be helpful?
Yeah, we certainly wouldn't object to this ordinance.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get your 2 cents on it, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
So ultimately, I don't have any further questions. If not for Mr. Paul, it's just one last statement. If you, Mr. Chairman, leave it up to you if you want to open it up to Mr. Pollitt before he...
Does anybody else want to speak with Mr. Pollitt? Councilor Gamache.
Yes,
Thank you, Councilor
through you to Mr. Pollitt. The situation is kind of twofold for you, because if you have an extended amount of plowing for the DPW dirt workers, there's a limit that they can do, and then they have to take time before they can go back on the shift, correct?
Yeah, I do not believe there is, depending on what they're doing, there's not a defined, but yes, if there does come to a point where you really do need to rest the employees, they can't be out there nonstop plowing.
Okay,
So,
well,
yes.
and I agree with you in that, and I've, having worked in the same office as you did when I was employed at the DPW office, there's an easy solution to this, and it's probably going to have to be brought up in the labor negotiations, but I find it very difficult to believe that the DPS employees aren't essential employees for snow removal. Just for that instance alone, if we can create an ordinance or a blue light or whatever to make sure people are off the street and all that stuff, they should be considered essential employees and they should have to come to work. And that also goes for the school department. Their custodians and their maintenance people should come in. There's no need for the city of Peabody to be plowing the school parking lots when they've got trucks with plows. Just doesn't make sense. And then if you can't get to it, you have the private contractors do it at $100 and whatever an hour, and it probably takes an hour to do a school. But that's one thing, and I don't want to get off the issue here, but that's one of them. And the other thing is that the 36 miles is just the Lynn Street, the Lowell Street, the major streets. So, I mean, that's just a drop in the bucket as to what we're looking at. So I just wanted to touch upon that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. I'm sorry, Councilor Peach.
Thank you. Mr. Paula, sorry, I have a question for you. This came up a couple years ago, so I'm not sure if you'll remember, but offhand, can you just let us know how many sidewalk plows does the city have, and how frequently have we had all of them operational during snow events?
Sure, we have 4. So at the last storm, we had 3 of them out on Tuesday morning. I would have to pull the records for anything prior to that, but yeah, we have 4 sidewalk plows and 3 of them were out plowing on Tuesday morning.
Thank you. So Margin Street, on one side of Margin Street, is included in this 36 miles. Why? I couldn't tell you. I live off of Margin Street. There's not an elementary school currently on Margin Street. But what it has led to is the property owners on Margin Street not shoveling their sidewalks because the city does it. And this was a few years ago when we had significant snowfall, and we just watched the snow sit there, and it didn't melt, and it didn't melt. And there are people who do walk there. It is a bus route, so maybe that's why the city started plowing it at some point, but the MBTA should probably pitch in for that. But to me, I was actually surprised when I found out there wasn't a requirement in the city of Peabody to shovel your sidewalk, because that's always just been what we've always done. You know, my parents live on Linfield Street, that's where I grew up. The plow, like just where they are, the plows dump snow, and they're snowbanks and snowbanks and snowbanks, and it has been made a point to make sure that they get shoveled. There's a crosswalk there, there's a bus stop there, and it's never been, the city doesn't go down that side of Linfield Street, they go down the other side of Linfield Street. So to me, it's, and I can understand what my colleagues that represent the other side of Peabody are saying. Nobody uses the sidewalks. Kids don't walk to school as frequently as they do in the center of the city. I think the easiest way to implement this is to implement it citywide. We already have location-specific language in our ordinances, and because of that, and maybe Councilor McGinn can speak to how frequently that's been fined, because it's mostly the downtown streets and that come off of downtown that are named in our ordinance. But you know, at the same time, we sit here and talk about how, you know, I will say I talk about, not we, requiring property own, and the fine should be issued to property owners, not residents. You wouldn't mail it to the house, you'd mail it to the owner on file. But regardless of that, I would like to see holding property owners accountable for removing snow and ice on their sidewalks. But after the last few storms, there has been snow and ice remaining on sidewalks that abut municipal parking lots. If maybe we can alleviate the DPS from plowing all of Lowell Street and all of Linfield Street and their sidewalks, because there are residential and business owners there that could either hire a contractor to do it or do it themselves, they'd have time to make sure that the sidewalks abutting our municipal parking lots are cleared, so we're not climbing over snowbanks after we park downtown. But that's just, I got a little off the rails. I just wanted to talk to the director about this sidewalk plows, as I know that they broke down a few years ago, and we had some issues with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Peach. Councilor McGinn, then Councilor Manning Martin, and then I'll go back to you, Councilor Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not on the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I would just start by saying if we are going to do something like this, I agree with Councilor Peach and Councilor Turco. It needs to be all or nothing citywide. I don't see how we can be selective about it based on ward. Through you to Councilor Higgins and I guess Councilor Peach, because they both asked a similar question about the enforcement of the current ordinance. Councilor Higgins, you asked how frequently, if we knew the number. I don't have any numbers. I only know anecdotally, based on what I've been, the enforcement activity I've been aware of, it's been very minimal over the years. There's been, complaints made to me that I've requested enforcement activity. I've made observations myself and requested enforcement activity. It's been difficult to come by, because often it's happening at a time when the operations are very stressed for other purposes. They're working on other priorities. And the feedback we often get, and a couple of folks have alluded, a couple of councilors have alluded to that here, is, the city's not holding themselves to the same standard. And there's good reason for that. Mr. Pollitt's just kind of went through the prioritization of the things they need to get to first, and, the sidewalk adjacent to a municipal lot isn't in that top priority list. They're getting to the sidewalks in the vicinity of the schools and so forth. So what they're doing makes sense. It just doesn't allow the city to comply with the same time frame in the ordinance that we're trying to hold some of the private property owners to. So that inconsistency creates a bit of a a problem with enforcement because, you know, people point to that. It doesn't necessarily get them off the hook per se, but it's a valid point. You know, this was last before this committee in February of 2024, and at that time, the city solicitor provided some other language from other communities. He also provided a list of other communities that, you know, area communities that have ordinances and those that don't, and, you know, which ones have fines and which ones don't have fines. I'm not sure everybody dug that out, but it's worth going back to take a look at that to kind of level set, you know, what is going on in the region. It's not uniform by any stretch of the imagination. One of the things that was discussed back at that last Legal Affairs meeting on this topic was exemptions. And I think Captain Richards mentioned if there are exemptions, you know, who's going to administer that and who's going to enforce it. I kind of jokingly said back in that last meeting that probably the city clerk would love to take that on as an additional responsibility. Jokingly, she's not even cracking a smile right now. But, you know, that's a big issue, I think, because it ends up being a reason why I think a lot of communities don't do this, because, you know, they're like, well, what if somebody's advanced age and, you know, they can't afford to do it? So, again, Attorney Khan had distributed some of these other area community ordinances, and I thought Beverly had exemption language. That's brief. I'll read it. Exemptions, individuals may be granted an exemption for the requirement of this section upon the submission of a form to the city attesting that, one, they are unable to perform snow and ice removal as required herein because they are A, over the age of 65, or B, physical health reasons prevent them from doing so, and two, due to financial hardship, they are unable to hire someone to do so, and such exemptions must be renewed annually. So, I mean, that language kind of makes sense to me. I would look for something like that in there, but just kind of like what Captain Richards said, and, you know, him having an opportunity, and Mr. Pollitt's having an opportunity to understand what the resource implications are of an ordinance like this. We should also look at what the resource implications of administering this kind of an annual exemption would be. I think it only works if you have it, but having it is going to be a burden. So, again, I think I heard Councilor Turco say that we would need to tweak this ordinance probably before we take any action on it. I don't think we're probably in a position to just say we like the Salem ordinance. I don't actually think it's comprehensive enough, but you know, I would suggest that we look to some of these other area ordinances, some of which has already been pulled together by Attorney Khan, and just try to maybe cherry pick some of the best of each of them, including this Beverly exemption language, and then again, kind of go back to the department heads and say, you know, is it realistic? Can we do this? What are the financial implications of actually doing this? And is it you know, it's great for us to pass an ordinance, but if the people that are charged with the enforcement don't think that they realistically are going to be able to do that, then we're kind of kidding ourselves. So that would be my suggestions and comments on this, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor McGinn. Councilor Manning Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Just a quick comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along the lines of what has been mentioned by Councilors Turco and Gamache regarding essential workers. Just a quick comment that I've always thought that the directors of departments, you know, department managers, should be out as essential workers during these snowstorms with radios, or their cell phones, to offer better supervision of snow removal across the city. They could call in neglected areas and just have more eyes out there instead of relying solely on public works. I think we could do a better job managing and monitoring if we increase the number of, or expectation of, essential employees. Certainly the directors are on salary, and I think that that would be quite an enhancement and improvement to include them as essential workers in some of these emergencies, certainly snow emergencies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Manning Martin. Councilor Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies. I actually thought you were going to come back to me after I deferred for Mr. Politz. So, you know, I'm actually glad that everybody else had a chance to add their 2 cents. I think there's not a ton of work to be done here, but to Councilor McGinn's point and Captain Richards, if we can find out who the enforcing, not so much the enforcing, but the who's going to process these violations, who's going to do the hearings for these violations. I just really hope this doesn't turn out to be, well, we need 2 more city positions and we'll make the money off the tickets. I don't want to see that. So we're going to have to do it with what we have. And, you know, where do you add that? So that's going to be a big discussion to have, and maybe our most difficult hurdle. You know, it was 50-50 on this ordinance. I could see a need for it. I agree with Councilor Peach. I was one of those people that she mentioned that used to look out the window and wait for the city plow to get my sidewalk. And they used to do my side. They did my side for about 3-4 years, and then I must have pissed somebody off because they moved to the other side of the street. But anyway, so with that being said, you know, I do see that. I see that there is a need, but there has to be the exemptions. There has to be some discussion, probably through the mayor's office, as to who would be able to process the amount of fines that we'll likely see to that. And lastly, I'll just say I would support it as a Peabody ordinance, not a South Peabody or an East Peabody ordinance, but as a Peabody ordinance. Councilor Peach, you've done a lot of work on this. I hate to put it all on your plate, but you know, I'm there to kind of help out if you need it. If anybody's looking for quick suggestions, just under section 3814, where you have Department of Public Services, in addition to police officers, shall be the enforcing persons. Under director, if you just add or his designee, because I know that sometimes Kevin or Will may not be in, so that Will would be able to designate somebody in his stead to be able to write violations. But that was just a simple one that I saw right off. But in the meantime, you know, I think your intention, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councilor Peach, your intention was for next winter, correct? Not for this winter, or were you hopeful for this winter?
Well, Counselor, my intention was to pass this 3 years ago when I made the motion, but, you know, I understand these things take time. So I'd like to get it done. And you know, I've heard the feedback, and I will continue to work on this with the mayor and other department heads. Thank you.
Thank you, and I guess I'll leave that up to you, Councilor. I was going to make a motion to Captain Richards to do exactly what he said he needed to do, but you could make that motion, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Councilor Turco. If there's no further councilors, I'll just, Councilor Daigle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I applaud Councilor Peach for putting this forward, and I think your intention is, this is more complaint-driven. It's not to enforce everything every day throughout the city. It's problem areas, but it gives the police or DPW or whoever it is, we have to work those details out. It gives them some teeth to enforce things that we don't have right now. So I do think this should be citywide. I don't think we should favor certain wards or certain areas, but I support it once we can work out the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Daigle. I'll just speak on this matter. I'm 100% in favor of this. I grew up on Bartholomew Street, which is pretty much a main street, shoveled that walkway every time it snowed, raised my family in West Peabody, where the difference between the two areas is really the size of the streets. So when you're talking about a safety issue, which is ultimately why this is in committee and why we need to act on this, it's about keeping basically pedestrians away from cars. In West Peabody, you can do that even if they're on the same road because the roads are so wide that it's not a significant safety issue. As you get more congestion, it's an absolute must. But as Councilor Turco put it, to say whether it's a South Peabody issue or a West Peabody issue, that's completely incorrect. Because there are walkers. Both of my kids did walk to the West School. And one of the biggest problems actually wasn't the sidewalks, it was getting to the school because the snowplow would literally block off one of the entrances. So I think that this is an important thing that we do have to move on. As far as tweaking the language, I would recommend coming out of this committee a motion for Captain Richards to review how other cities and towns are implementing this and how they've interacted and acted on these measures. So I will entertain that motion.
So
but
moved.
You heard the motion from Councilor Peach. Any discussion on the motion? Being none, all in favor, any opposed, it's a vote. With that said, a couple of things that I would like to see is a 24-hour rule. You give the resident 24 hours to clean their space because God only knows, you know, in one of the ordinances, 6, throughout other communities. In one of the street ordinances that we currently have, it's 4. I think 24 hours is an ample window for people to be able to clean their sidewalk. The second thing is and everybody's kind of touched on it, that right now the city does 36 miles of sidewalk. I think that that's daunting. And as far as what you had mentioned, Councilor Turco, as far as staff to implement and to monitor this, I think the staff that's actually doing the sidewalks now would be the ones that we would just flip the script. They'd be the ones that would now work on implementation instead of plowing 36 miles of sidewalk, because it would be up to the residents, business owners, landlords to do their part. So those are my thoughts on this. I do think this needs a little bit of work. I do appreciate Captain Richards coming before us and willing to go to other communities and see how it's implemented. With that said, any other further comments or suggestions from the subcommittee, from the council as a whole? Councilor Higgins.
Yeah, you just touched upon a topic. We're doing 36 miles of roadway or sidewalk ways, and I'd like to see that prioritized. Of those 36 miles of sidewalk that's getting cleared by the city, how many miles are actually usable? I saw almost all of Lowell Street cleared, and 90% of it, I don't ever see anybody walking on it. So could we not, prioritize the cleaning of around emergency areas like schools? Thank you.
On that, the first priority is the streets. So we have right now, and Mr. Pollitt, you can address this even further, but our first priority is the streets and making sure the roadways are cleared. We don't have the staff to do both of them simultaneously. Most of the time, the people that are plowing the streets are the ones that end up coming back and doing the sidewalks. So if they're doing the sidewalks first, then we don't have streets cleaned. But Mr. Pollitt, if you could just address that.
Yeah, certainly. As I had said earlier, and Councilor Rosano had just stated, obviously our first priority is to get the streets open and maintained, and then, as I said earlier, we then move on to other priorities, and including why we're plowing the streets, we're also simultaneously taking care of the police department so that they can get in and out, and we're also taking care of the fire departments simultaneously. And then we'll move on to other things. We have plenty of parking lots that we need to do. There's parks, playground parking lots, all the municipal parking lots, and other miscellaneous things we're we're doing. And then at that point, as we start transitioning out of that operation and as we start to treat the roads, then the sidewalk plows would, in theory, go out at that point. So yes, it's toward the tail end of the storm after everyone's already been in the vehicles. And as Councilor Rosenell said, yes, it's the same employees. So they're either in a sidewalk plow or they're in a one-ton. So they can't, be both places at once.
Thank you, Mr. Politz. Councilor Higgins.
Yes, just to clarify, when I said prioritize, I'm talking about the sidewalks only. I'm not prioritizing sidewalks over streets. So instead of doing, 36 miles of sidewalks, 6 miles of Lowell Street, why don't we prioritize the sidewalk cleaning to the areas that are considered, dangerous or an emergency situation, all our schools and public buildings, rather than just going 5 miles down Lowell Street on a sidewalk that 90% of which isn't used. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Higgins. Any further comments from the subcommittee? So we'll keep this in subcommittee, and then we'll ask Captain Richards to come back regarding implementation in other districts, and we'll work on language for the ordinance through you, Councilor Peach, as well as Attorney Khan. Thank you. Councilor Gamache.
Yes, do I have to, I would like to include an issue of the blue light and the parking and the towing and the ticketing as a separate, but do you want me to make it as a motion?
So would that be better
council?
served in public service?
I really don't care what committee it goes in. I just want to make sure we address it, because right now there's a serious problem when, and I can give you an example. There were how many cars towed and how many cars ticketed, and the blue light in the robocalls isn't working. It just doesn't work. So
I think
I'll
maybe,
put it in public services.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Any further comments? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. You heard the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? It's a vote. We're adjourned.